Inspiration, clarity, confidence, and wholehearted business strategy. Welcome to Your Next Chapter, the podcast especially for women in their 40s and beyond who know that business and personal development go hand in hand. Tune in each week for marketing, mindset, and personal growth strategies, along with inspiring stories from women around the world who are creating new businesses and lives that are personally fulfilling and financially rewarding. If you're looking to create a business and life you love, you're in great company. Let's find out what will unfold in your next chapter. I'm your host, Angela Rasmus, and I'm so delighted that you're here. Hello there, it's Angela Rasmus, and welcome to episode 22 in the Your Next Chapter podcast. Now today, the wholehearted conversation is a particularly brilliant one. It's with a woman by the name of Caroline Wood, and she's from the Ingredients of Business. Now, the reason I'm so excited about sharing this particular conversation with you is because of the trajectory that Caroline has been on. It's the perfect example of how we might initially follow our heart, then get a little afraid, go in another direction, but keep being pulled back by that desire to do a particular thing in the world. And Caroline's journey is just almost like a map of what happens to so many of us. So just as a quick overview to give you a good reason to dig into this episode, Caroline's always been a foodie, loves food, great with food, and in fact, her first role was in the Air Force as a catering officer. But things changed there, and her parents encouraged her very much to get a safe type of job, and she went down the route of accountancy. She's brilliant with numbers, really, really great at being able to use them to close the gaps in a business. And she did this to huge success in her corporate life. But then that feeling came back. That feeling of this is just not filling me up anymore. I just don't want to be doing this type of work in the world. And when she really tuned into how she was feeling, she found that she was drawn right around to that original starting point again. Now, she's already a well-respected food blogger at shrinkingsingle.com by now, but then she got this desire to create the ingredients of business, to really simplify the startup process and share all those necessary ingredients to produce a delicious product and a tasty turnover for people who are building businesses in the food arena. So there's that gorgeous example of I've got these skills and I've got this experience and this desire. And if I really step back and blend these together, voila, here is a next chapter that lights me up. So Caroline also recognizes that those original skills, those accounting skills, can be utilized for many, many small businesses. It's just that she's got that particular interest in the food industry herself. But she's gifted you with a fabulous cash flow guide from today's episode, and I really encourage you to dive in and download this as well as listen obviously to the episode. So if you go to angelarasmus.com/22, that's number 22, download, you'll get a hold of that cash flow guide and also the Excel spreadsheet. Now, cash flow is something that is essential for all businesses to get a handle on, but sometimes as solo entrepreneurs, we avoid the subject. So if that's you, because it was certainly me before I got my bookkeeper, then this is a resource you're going to find really helpful. And of course, this is an interview that I know you'll find inspiring. Also, the last little thing to share with you is Caroline identifies as an introvert. And this is really important to appreciate and understand as well. We all find our own voice and our own way of showing up in the world, in our business and in our life. Introverts, extroverts, ambiverts, it doesn't matter what type of personality you identify with having. All it matters is that you get your voice into the world in that authentic way, that you do follow your heart, but you bring your head along for the ride. So I really hope you enjoy this interview. Let's get started, shall we? Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode in Your Next Chapter podcast. We're up to episode 22, and I'm delighted to be introducing you today to a foodie accountant, a rather delectable combination. Caroline Wood is from Canberra in Australia and has a wonderful story to share with us today about the large change and leap you can make from a corporate background into your own business. So, Caroline, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Well, I love to get started on these wholehearted conversations to get a little bit of insight on what does a next chapter mean to you and in context of your own experiences.
So I think the big thing that the next chapter means to me is doing things my way and creating a business that I love that also supports my values. So I come from, sort of an accounting background, but also have worked a lot in not-for-profits. And while I've seen good things in both of those environments, I really feel I found it difficult to find a company that truly reflects my values. So a lot of it has been about trying to build a business that really reflects who I am and to be a bit more authentic to who I am. Particularly, I think, in the not-for-profit space where, people are giving money quite freely. I think, I've had some issues about working in some of those organisations. So really about, developing a business that I feel matches me and that where I get to give back to the community in a way that feels authentic to me.
That's a big part of the message that I think everyone who's listening, and I've certainly discovered with a lot of the women that I've spoken to, is that concept of value reflection. Like, we can't do business perhaps the way that we used to. There's things that have become far more important to us as we've grown up, shall we say, and gathered that wisdom. And so creating a business that reflects those values, but also that fulfillment piece, so that you really feel good about the work that you're doing, that you're making a contribution. Is that really a reflection of what we're saying here?
Yes, I think so. And I think it's about, as you get older, you do get more comfortable with what your values are and living those values than perhaps you do when you're younger.
And that concept of living those values, I think that's a really important one. And I've quite often found when people are not feeling good about what they're doing, it's quite often because those values are in conflict. So it's interesting to look at what is a value and what does that look like in action as opposed to just a concept. Do you have an example of that, of what one of your core values are and how it's reflected in the business that you've created today?
Yes, I think one of my big values is that there's a sense of community about where I work and where I live, and that I give back to a community. So, my big value is around people supporting each other. And as part of that, in talking to food businesses, I really noticed that was missing from what they were doing, that they were very much doing things alone, as I'm sure you've seen with your business. So it was trying to create a space where they get a sense of community and where I get to feel that I'm creating something that meets that need in other people, as well as fulfilling that need for community in myself.
That's a huge one, isn't it? That basic human thing of not wanting to be alone. We're craving connection and to find out what other people are going through, be it in establishing businesses or other stuff that's happening in your life. To know that you've got commonality there can make such a big difference, can't it?
It can. And I think for me, because I am an introvert, I think the internet and social media and all the new tools that are out there has made it a lot easier for me to get that sense of community without actually, in a way that isn't devaluing my introversion.
And that's that. I think there's a lot of people that do have, the introverted tendencies. I mean, we're one way or the other. And you're absolutely right. There is a brilliant opportunity for us to connect with people without having to put... I'm an extroverted introvert. I like being out there in the world, but oh my goodness, I need that time to refresh, to refuel myself. That's just so essential, and I've recognized that more about myself as I've become older. I used to think that I had to be the life of the party, and that was who I was. But no, I definitely need to withdraw and regroup. And I mean, even things as simple as online communities, Facebook groups, where you can connect with people in a quieter way, can be very fulfilling.
Yes, no, I think they're really good, and I think they allow more of a space for thinking that introverts haven't perhaps had in the past in a traditional corporate environment where there are meetings and you have to respond immediately and react immediately. They allow a lot more of that space for reflection and thinking about answers before having to reply. That's
a really good point, yeah. I love the idea of responding rather than reacting. And you're right, you definitely have that space. Well, let's talk a little bit specifically about your business, because as I've already explained in the intro to this podcast, that you're working with small business owners who have food businesses in particular. But how did you come to that point? Have you always been a foodie, or has this been a hobby that you've turned into a business?
It's sort of been... So my mum was always an amazing cook, and I think... hanging out at school. If anything, I probably complained about the fancy meals that she used to make as compared to the meat and 3 veg that everyone else was eating. But then I joined the Air Force, and I worked there as a catering officer, so running some messes for them.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of the food side of things. But they were then outsourcing a lot of that work, and I sort of wandered off into accountancy because I do like numbers as well as food. So the accountancy then sort of took over, and we were working crazy hours, working in a Big 5 accounting firm, and I didn't really do any cooking at all. And since I managed to sort of slow my life down and found, worked in jobs that have more work-life balance, it became a hobby. It sort of reignited my love of food, and that sort of led me into this combining the food and the accounting together.
It would seem like an interesting recipe, on the surface, accounting and food. Okay, yeah. How do these blend? But it's often those unique, or what might look like on the outside like a unique combination, actually really have strength. So tell us how those two pieces, or those two strengths of yours, have combined together in this business. How did they blend together and become such a strength for you?
I think it's two ways that I love food businesses. I love food. I love seeing the new things that people are creating. But then, just seeing a lot of food businesses really struggling with that numbers side of the puzzle, which, to me comes quite natural. So it was me looking at how I can support these beautiful food businesses and make sure they survive, because I just adore eating their food, in a way that then, helped them get over their fear of the numbers. And I did a lot of numbers work helping people afraid of numbers when I worked for a large international NGO, so program managers who were managing projects that had complex budgets, and they were really afraid of those numbers. And I really, I think from that experience learned that I was actually very good at simplifying the numbers and explaining it in a way that made them comfortable with them. And I really wanted to bring that to the food sector.
That's such a great thing to recognise that, and a lot of us miss this, the things that come naturally to us, the things that almost like a second nature, as you just said there, that you have this gift for simplifying the numbers. I hear that expression and sort of breathe out. My sister's an accountant, and she to me, she's like a magician. She actually runs my book. She set up all Xero for me and just makes it all work beautifully. Now, if I tried to do that myself, I would definitely not be in my zone of genius. I'd be in my zone of incompetence, and I recognise that. And this is where building a next chapter business based on the things that A, come easily and naturally to you, and B, the things you love, that to me is the absolute heart of that potential business success. And that's what you've blended so beautifully. So looking at that and recognizing that combination, let's look at the numbers. Why do you think, or have you found rather, that small business owners get mystified or bamboozled by the numbers? Why do you think that happens?
I think there's probably two factors at play. I think probably the first one is that when they do go talk to an accountant, the accountant talks in accounting to them rather than in plain English. And so that they don't have, and there are some brilliant accountants out there who do work well with small businesses, but I think there's a lot that don't. And then I think the other thing is, particularly for women, I think, and perhaps it's more of our generation, I'm not sure, but that maths isn't a subject that's encouraged at school. It's not one that girls are made to feel comfortable with, and it's not taught in a way that is perhaps engaging enough. So it doesn't give them enough real-world examples as to how they're actually going to use it, and I think it just becomes something that's too hard and too complicated, when in actual fact the numbers that you really need for your business shouldn't be that complicated at all. And I definitely think people should be outsourcing bookkeeping and all that sort of thing. But the understanding the big picture of what your numbers are telling you, is actually something that you can get on top of quite easily once someone shows you what you should be looking at.
That's a really great point, and I think if we delve into that a little bit, I'm thinking back to my days at high school back in New Zealand, and I can remember my maths teacher. He was not a pleasant chap. He certainly didn't encourage me. I was certainly in the expression side of things. I was in the debating club, and I was great at English and geography, and places where I got to be more creative, so to speak. And that, what you're saying there, the stereotype about girls and maths, was definitely definitely in place. And we're talking back in the early 80s. That I was there in that high school environment. I think you're absolutely right. We begin to spin this story, and this is obviously not true of everybody, so I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush, but it's quite likely, if that's the era that we're in, that we have this story going that we're not good at maths and we're not good at the numbers, and we haven't actually updated that story.
Yeah, and I think I was lucky that I went to an all-girls school, so there wasn't that same... I think it was still there, but not in quite the same ways. Perhaps you got in mixed sex schools where I think it was very much, in the 80s, girls are good at English and boys are good at maths. And I think that is the story that has, even if not consciously, I think subconsciously that's been fed to us.
Mm. Yeah, I think it has. And, when I love the point that you made before, is that when we actually get to understand the big picture, I can understand how the finances and how the cash flow and how the other aspects of our business, once we understand that big picture, we feel actually very empowered. When my very, very financially savvy, accounting experienced sister took me through the big picture, it was like, you know what, I get this. Like if I'd had to set it all up myself from the start, that could have been a very different story. But once I actually decided to challenge that story that I'm not good at numbers, I'm not good with finances, I'm not, I don't know how this stuff works. That was actually a very much avoidance behaviour on my behalf. And when I decided to put that story to one side, I'll never be an accountant. I recognise it is not my zone of genius, but it is now a zone of competence. I can get it. I can ask the right questions. I can look for the right numbers. And it's definitely made me take control of my business in a way that I didn't have before. Is that what you see with the clients that you're working with as well?
Yeah, and I think what really started me on this journey was I was working with a project manager on a tsunami project after the huge tsunami up in Indonesia.
Yeah.
And just going through her budget with her and the sense of the power that it gave her when she finally understood the budget and how she could use it to make the project as successful as she possibly could. Just the joy that she got out of seeing that it was a tool that she could use and that would make her life easier. I think I got such a great buzz out of being able to show that to her. It was just fantastic. And I think that is it. It's the numbers are just a tool to help you get your business going better. They're not something that you should be doing for the tax man or something. Well, obviously you should be doing your taxes, but it's not something that you do primarily for your taxes. It's a tool that can really help you drive your business as well.
And I know that one of the wonderful things that's happening in this particular episode is that you're providing us with a cash flow management tool for solopreneurs, which we'll be able to download and get some really good tips from you as to how we can approach this side of our business. So for everyone listening, that is angelarasmus.com/22, the number 22, and the word download to have that wonderful resource from Caroline. So that feeling that you had when you were helping that particular person, that's what you're enjoying about the business today, is your ability to demystify those numbers and to be able to help those small business owners, correct?
Yeah, I think it's about empowering them and giving them a sense that they're in control of the numbers, that the numbers aren't in control of them.
So it's that real feeling of contribution that a lot of next chapter businesses, that's what it's all about. It's that desire to give back. It's that desire to contribute and to be fulfilled by the contribution we make. But it doesn't always start there. And I know some of the things that we can delve into here will sort of paint the picture a little bit further as well. So what stopped you from following your real dreams when you left school? Because you were definitely going in one direction and now we've moved up into another one. So was there things that tripped you up at first when you go back and look at those previous chapters of your life?
I think so. So certainly, both my parents, are middle class, but my dad comes from, quite a poor working background, and mum's family certainly had financial problems in the past. And I think so much pressure from them to do something that would be a good, safe career that would earn me a good income really, I think, diverted me from seeing some of those, looking at some of those opportunities that were out there. So, I think I look at, these 20-year-olds today who are out there setting up their businesses and doing entrepreneurship. And I think while the internet has certainly helped with that process, I think there's also a more acceptance around that than perhaps there was when we were at school, that it was much more seen, you followed more traditional career paths even then.
That was definitely a conversation, well, this is definitely a conversation I've had with many other women. I mean, I remember when I was leaving, the typical, there was still a sort of a typical approach to what those career options would be. I certainly didn't have entrepreneurial role models at all of, women around me who were creating businesses at that sort of possible level. I mean, you heard about some of the really big businesses, but there was a real miss in that middle. And certainly the internet has opened everything, having clients all over the world now. So it's certainly opened a door for us. But yeah, it was, let's be honest, it was different back then, so to speak.
Yeah, I think I find it really unusual with my mother in particular, because both her grandparents were effectively entrepreneurs. They did own small corner shops, and I think it's interesting how quickly that, left the family's DNA, and that you became, both her parents were teachers, and that you very much, stuck into that. You got a career. You didn't go out and create something yourself.
So what got you back on track? So the idea there was that, okay, I went down the more traditional route, I sort of did what was expected of me, and then the world started to open a little bit. So what brought you back on track to actually connect back into what's important to you and to start to follow your dreams?
I think, you read about some people having this big blinding flash of realisation that had happened, but for me I think it's just been a slow sense of being not completely satisfied and not completely happy in the roles I was doing. Even though they were working with, fabulous NGOs who were doing great work, it wasn't quite connecting with me. And I went and saw a career coach. And while that was still looking at careers, she certainly got me thinking about my values and what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go, and sort of started to dangle that idea of, maybe setting something up by myself. So it's been, I think, a very slow process of realising that, the corporate world isn't quite the right fit for me, and then having conversations with people who say that it is okay to set up your own business has really moved me forward to that, that place where I'm now doing it.
So when you were having those sort of conversations, was that just with the career coach, or did you find other people, other women, other men that were in that space of setting up their own businesses to have these conversations with?
I think it was mainly with the career coach. I think, and my network, aside from, my actual business, has still, my personal network of, real life friends that I've met, outside of the online world are still very much in that career mode. And so I think that, that is challenging. I still, I've explained to, my very good friends that I'm running this business now, and, they're still sending me job ads for things that I might like to do, So I think particularly living in Canberra, which is very much a public service town, there's still very much that idea that you have a career and you work for someone else rather than setting something up yourself. I've really had to go out and look for people to have that conversation with.
Now, that took a lot of courage to do that, because I've certainly found that feeling of isolation and like I'm on my own can be one of the things that holds us back from making the move that you've made. So that's a real mindset issue. How did you overcome that? I mean, what were the doubts or some of the concerns that were coming up for you that to make this significant change?
I think for me, with my my parents' background, the biggest thing has always been the money side of things. So that's a real big deal for me, and I think it's been important for me to recognise that in the journey and to try and do things in a way that stretches me without sending me into complete panic mode about what's happening with my money. But I think the other big mindset is just, realising that I think, for me, as I said, the numbers come quite easily, and to me they seem quite obvious. So it's been really working around that idea of what's obvious to me isn't to everyone else, and that I do have something to share. I think, getting onto Facebook groups and, interacting with people that way has really helped me to overcome that.
So there's two really key things that you just mentioned there. Number one, I do have something to share, and I'll add on to the end of that, of value. Yep. I do have something to share of value. So we really have to own that, don't we? Especially if these things do come easily to us, as we were discussing earlier. So is that something that you have consistently reminded yourself of? I have something of value. I have something to share. Like, is that a bit of a mantra?
It is. And I mean, I think it's a bit hidden now, but for a long time I've had just a card on my whiteboard pinned up saying something like, what's obvious to you isn't to others, but, maybe more nicely framed like that. So having an actual visual reminder of that, I think, has been really important.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't obviously see me here. We're just doing it over voice at the moment. But right beside me, I've got a great big pin board that has a lot of those reminders. And one of my favourite is that you are the bridge between current reality and possibility for someone else. Own that value.
Yeah.
So that's very much what I've held on to. I've got heaps of them. Another one I love is the Dr. Seuss one. Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happens. So they're all over the place. But you're right. Those visual reminders, especially if you are working, as we often are, in our wee home offices, alone. But let's also touch on the money mindset, because that's a really crucial one as well. There is a lot of fear around, am I going to be able to generate an income from this business? Is it going to work? That's a very real concern for a lot of people. What was your approach to that in terms of getting your confidence and your self-belief built?
I think for me, the big thing has been actually developing a financial buffer for myself. So, making some sacrifices around what I've spent money on to make sure that I have money in the bank so that if something goes wrong, I know I can cover it. And I think, I'm quite risk averse around money, and other people won't need that buffer. But for me, that's been really important. And I think it's, for each individual, it's recognising what you need to do to manage that fear. And also, I think it's been about, looking at what would happen if something did go wrong, and, what are my alternatives. And I do, if I absolutely had to, and I think being single, this is one of the advantages I have is that, if I absolutely had to, I could move back into the family home if things went absolutely pear-shaped, which I don't think they're going to, but it's just nice to realise that you've got these fallback positions if you need them.
So it's like a backup plan, and that's and some people might say, well, that's a bit pessimistic to think, you've got to put these in place in case you fail. Well, no, it's a grown-up thing to do. It's a sensible, a logical, and intelligent, a wise thing to do, to look at something 360.
And I don't think that everyone needs them, or not to the same extent. I think it's really understanding where you come from and what your personal background is, and doing what feels right for you. Absolutely,
and I think looking at that as a concept, one of the things when I'm speaking with my own clients, and one of the things that we set are financial goals for the business. And those financial goals are going to be very dependent on what your personal situation is. So somebody who is, like you're saying yourself, a single woman who's taking care of herself, and you are your breadwinner, your financial goals will look very different from somebody else who is in a situation where they don't have to work, but they choose to work because they're with a partner who perhaps brings in a really good income, and so they've got less of a particular financial stress in that area. And there's all sorts of other things in between. So setting your financial goals for your business growth on your specific situation is really important, rather than just having them as sort of vague, I'd like to make some money with this business.
Yeah, and I think I love the Facebook groups and what you can get out of them, but I also think there's a lot of pressure put on people to spend money on courses, and I think I've got a lot out of doing courses and working with coaches, and they've been a really great investment for me. But I really hate these messages that you get out there that you're not willing to make an investment in yourself. You can always find the money for something. I think that can be quite a harsh line to take with people, and can get people into some real financial trouble without people giving too much advice perhaps on Facebook groups, particularly around that money situation, without really understanding a person's position.
That's very true. Oh, my God. Give me a soapbox. I'll jump on it. There's a couple of other girlfriends, we talk about this a lot, and, those messages that can be so damaging on social media about, not just that, well, you're not willing to invest in yourself. You're obviously not serious about your business. And I've heard some horrendous conversations, like sales conversations, that people have felt so pressured and so, extremely icky, shall we just say, in those situations. And then the other side, which can be the pressure of, well, this person's produced this, and click here and learn my system and earn $100,000, etc., etc. And it just doesn't feel good. That is for sure.
Yeah, I think it's about getting people to a position where they do feel comfortable investing in themselves. I think you see a lot of stories out there about people who've done it by spending, $10 and they've made a multi-million-dollar business. And I think that's not reality either. It's this middle point that I think we don't get the message very clearly about on social media. It's either spend, thousands to create your business, hundreds of thousands of dollars, or you can only spend $10. There isn't this moderate in between. Yeah.
And there is a middle road, and I believe that. I know that there's stories that we see. My girlfriends and I, or belief buddies and I, call them the jackpot stories.
Yeah.
But there's without exception, when I've dug below the surface of people who are successful, and that's success however you like to define it, it's not an overnight thing. It's been let's be consistent, let's show up, let's put the effort in on a long-term basis quite often for you to be able to get those results.
Yeah.
So we have to be a little careful with the smoke and mirrors that's shown to us. But there was and I can't remember who said this, but it's a phrase that I really, really like, a concept, which is just in time versus just in case learning and investment. So, looking at when should I invest in something, be the services of a coach or a mentor or a particular program or an experience. And this person was talking about, do you have a genuine gap? Like, for example, if you're wanting to launch a program and you want to use Facebook, but you've got no idea how to actually put together Facebook ads, it makes sense to then invest in some type of assistance in that area. That's just in time investing, which makes sense. But seeing something go past in your Facebook feed and, I might need that one day, so I'll, just in case that becomes necessary, I'll invest in that now. That's not a great investment tool necessarily. So I really liked that distinction. What do you think of that one?
I really like it, and I think when I first was getting started, that really tripped me up. I think it's so, I did do a lot of the just in case things now, and I've really managed to get that under control, and I'm doing more the just in time. But it can get so overwhelming. There's just so much that people are out there telling you that you need to know or need to learn to be able to grow particularly an online business. And I think it can get quite I'd say overwhelming and almost get you frozen into you can't take action because you haven't learned about that yet.
Yeah, it can certainly be overwhelming. So let's just talk about your particular business in terms of what have you found were the good decisions, the good actions that you took that you, with the benefit of hindsight, can see were good decisions and have helped you build your business. Because you're absolutely right. A lot of the women that are listening are like, oh my God, there's like 1,001 things that I could do to grow my business. What would you say has been or have been some of the most successful and useful tools and actions that you've taken?
I think that's really the number one thing that has really helped me with running my business is getting on the phone and talking to some food businesses who are my ideal clients, and really understanding what their problems and what their issues were, and then developing I'm in the process of launching at the Food Incubator, but developing a product that really meets that need. So with the one-on-one coaching or consultancy, whatever you want to call it, you get to talk to someone about their problem, but that's quite individual, to try and get an understanding of what a broader group was struggling with. I think just getting on the phone and talking to a group of them was definitely the best thing I did. So
that research.
Yeah, really understanding what they were struggling with.
Well, that makes perfect sense, and people, I love the expression that people invest not because they understand what it is that you're selling, but because they are understood. That's obviously what you were doing there by taking the time and having the care and the empathy to actually spend that time with those people and to get that understanding. So that's a great piece of advice. Do you want to add another one to it as well? This is good.
I think that the other one would just have been getting onto Facebook groups and finding like-minded people that way. As I say, my personal circle is very much about public service and having careers, and just finding some people out in the world who are in the same position and getting to talk to them and share experiences. And I'm really lucky now that, I've got a friend who's interested in getting on board, and we're looking at doing something locally that I'm really excited about, and it's really lovely to actually have a person to work with face-to-face in person. It's a really lovely experience. But, just going out and finding some people who were in the same boat and just having those conversations.
Yeah, that's so important, isn't it? It's that we were talking before we hit the record button today about that need to get those like-minded souls, and how we originally connected, which was through the Next Chapter, Your Next Chapter Facebook group, where there's a heck of a lot of kindred spirits who are in this stage of life, which does feel very different, as we were discussing, my values and my goals and what's important to me, and when it comes to contribution and fulfillment at 47 is a hell of a lot different to what it was at 27. So
yes.
And I ran a 2-day event a few weeks back that I have each year. It's the annual Your Next Chapter Live event. And there we were talking about how you can't necessarily rely on your family to be your biggest supporters, because quite often they don't know what the heck we're doing. And yes, they could do things like send you job ads and things like that, which we know it comes from a place of love and caring, but it can be bloody annoying.
Yes. And I think one of the best things I've done is basically stop talking to my family about my business.
Yeah.
Because I could see that they were getting scared for me, which was then reflecting back on me, and it was just like, I just need to stop these conversations and I'm just not talking to you about it anymore.
Yeah, we don't need that one anymore. So it's and I love that idea of consciously being aware that these people over here, they fulfill a certain need in my life, but they can't fill this need. So I need to go and find someone or some people that can.
Yeah.
And for everyone that's listening, if you're yet to become a member of the Your Next Chapter Facebook group, just Google us, and there's links on my website, and there's always on the podcast page as well a link through to the group, and you'd be very welcome to come and hang out with ladies like us online.
I think it's just lovely, that private nature of the Facebook groups, that people don't need to be worried about it appearing on their timelines.
Yes, that's a biggie, isn't it? And that's that feeling of confidentiality and camaraderie that you can produce and create in those Facebook groups is really, really good. And that's actually one of the things that you're creating with the Food Incubator, isn't it? Yeah,
so I want to, and we'll have a Facebook group as part of it. So just trying to create a community, because I think they've got, food businesses have so much to share and learn from each other, and I'm hoping that I've spoken to a few foodies who, they're worried about other people stealing their ideas, that if the group is big enough, they can talk to a baker, say, who is in the UK and they're in the US, and not feel that they're going to be talking to their competitors in their same city. So trying to create that safe space where they can have, real conversations about what's happening in their business and what they're doing without being worried about people stealing their ideas or talking directly to competitors.
And it's great to be able to create that environment for them.
Yeah.
Now, this whole story of how, and I love the progression of how, when you started off in one area and then you've moved into another area and then you've started to recognise, and that's what happens, this sort of yearning begins to show up, this desire for something different. And it's having the courage and the self-awareness to turn around and notice it, and to listen to it, and then to choose to actually do something with it. Because there's a lot of us who we're feeling that yearning like you had, but we don't allow ourselves to explore it and to actually look at what that new possibility would be like. What would you say to a woman listening now who has that feeling that, look, it's not, I'm not real happy with what's happening, and I've got this idea, but what would you say to her?
I think that the best thing I did in terms of that was just actually going and talking to a business coach one-on-one. And I think that's what I'd recommend to anyone with that yearning, is to really try and get some professional, impartial advice about, who you are and what you'd like to do, and just talking to them about, how you could perhaps turn that into something, that makes you happier with your life. I think that's certainly what really got me moving, I think, was going to talk to someone who had helped other businesses and could see, could give you the message that it's possible, and that can show you examples that it's possible, and, then walk you through a process to actually do it yourself.
And then voila, before you know it, the whole business flourishes.
It does.
And so that, that's great advice. There's that of actually getting that professional input and insight. I work myself with a coach all the time who's helped me absolutely develop. And it's very difficult to see the spot that you're standing on. But then there is that other side as well, which we've talked about quite thoroughly, is finding those like-minded people who can give you that encouragement and help you build your belief muscle that it is possible.
Yeah. Definitely. I think particularly if you don't have strong support networks at home, just getting out there and finding other people, who will support you and will cheer you on from the sidelines.
Absolutely. Well, let's say if anyone listening does have a food business, we definitely want them to find you, but also just where can we find you online in general? Because your experience is the experience that so many of us have, and you've taken that leap and gone in and created this next chapter. So that power of example is very, very powerful. So how can we find you online, Caroline?
So probably the best way is just to hop on over to my website, which is theingredientsofbusiness.com. And then at the top of the website, you'll just see all the links to my social media profiles as well, with where you can sort of see what I'm doing online and have a chat to me. I love talking to any kind of business, really. I think, while I specialise in food businesses, just talking to other women about what they're doing with their business is, I think one of the best things I can do in my day.
Absolutely. It feels great, doesn't it, when we get to have those sort of conversations and to make that sort of contribution of, as we're saying, the power of example and the power of inspiration.
Yeah. I just love talking about business. I think everyone's doing their thing differently, and it's just so fascinating to hear what's working and how they're doing it their way.
And that's the thing. This is a concept that I know that we both share, is there isn't a cookie cutter approach to it. It's very much about bringing those individual values and passions and skills and blending that into, if I could be so bold, a recipe for success. I say to you, when we're first talking, my daughter, I tell her every morning when I'm taking her up to the bus stop, and my son as well, of when I'm doing a podcast interview, and I said, I'm speaking to a lovely lady who has a business called The Ingredients of Business, and Charlotte went, "Well, great name. That's really clever." So you got the endorsement of a 13-year-old for going forward, okay?
That's fantastic.
Well, Caroline, thank you so much for spending your time with us today and just sharing that journey that you've been on. So, as I said, a great example of following your heart but bringing along your head for the ride as well.
Thank you for having me. It's been so lovely chatting to you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, everybody who spent your time here with us today on the Your Next Chapter podcast. I hope you found this conversation as inspiring as I have, and that if you have that desire that's burning away inside of you of what could be that possible next step in a new direction into a next chapter, then screw up your courage and take that leap. Start talking to other people. Take those baby steps forward so that you can bring your dream to life, because it is absolutely possible. So this is Angela Rasmus, and I look forward to talking with you again on the next episode. Have a lovely day. Thanks for listening to the Your Next Chapter podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please let me know. Pop over to angelarasmus.com to subscribe to the show and leave a review. And whilst you're there, you can also enjoy valuable free resources, including show notes and downloads, along with the Next Chapter community, where you can connect with other wholehearted women on the same journey as you. We'd love to welcome and support you as your next chapter unfolds. See you next time.